have to just find the agenda.
And I can post the agenda in the chat. Give me just a minute.
Thank you. Okay, so
Hey, Abby, I'm just driving home from the mountain. I'll be home in like 15 minutes. So if you wouldn't mind kind of leading us until then, I'm here. I'll participate, but it'd be easier not to facilitate.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
I will carry forth. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Apologies for the late start. It is a day in February. I think it's the 4th. The 4th.
Yeah.
It's the 4th. This is the first meeting, I think, of 2022 of the Agriculture and Ecosystem Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. And we are going to start with something that I will tell you shortly. A greeting and a review and approval of the agenda. Oh God, and the 12:17 minutes, which maybe Marion can put in the chat in the event that anybody has any. I'm not sure everybody has reviewed those recently. So I'll give us a second for you to look at those minutes if you'd like. Otherwise, barring that, just, you know, throw up a yell if you're not okay with them. And is Jane here?
Jane is not here today, so you guys.
So you're okay. I'm going to
cover.
turn things over to Marion to give us kind of an overall update of where everything sits, and then we'll go from there.
Great. Yeah, so we have a bit of time on the agenda to talk about work planning from the council's perspective, get a bit of a legislative session update, and to a question David raised just a minute ago, I'll give a really quick overview of where Jane has been providing testimony sort of for the CAP Roadshow, but we'll turn it over to anyone on the subcommittee who's been testifying. Sounds like David and Ryan have been busy, Abby's been busy, Billy's been busy, so I'm happy to provide some space for updates for relevant bills that you all think the subcommittee should hear about. And then we'll jump into talking about your work groups, which is really a good segue into discussion around work planning for the council for 2022. So the council met about a week ago to discuss sort of the path forward for 2022. There are a couple of big work items that we have money in the budget for that are going to be moving forward. Those include the Municipal Vulnerability Index, as well as the Measuring and Assessing Progress tool. And those will be put out for, we'll be pulling contractors in to work on those using funds from this year's budget. And then there are a number of other items that we'll talk about today, and we've been talking about in other subcommittees where work groups are forming to start exploring those tasks and potentially pursue funding in the future for RFPs for those, or to continue to develop those. But generally, what it's shaping up for in terms of work planning is subcommittees, at least those that have started to meet this year, are planning on meeting once a month, no more than that. And the work is really happening in these smaller work groups that are focused on the particular deliverables. So things like the Municipal Vulnerability Index, the Measuring and Assessing Progress tool, Climate Toolkit, exploring transportation options to sort of fill the space of TCI from the cross-sector section. So that's what it looks like in terms of work planning. I can dive into more detail on any of those if folks have questions, but the council discussed those priorities at their meeting a week ago, and the steering committee will be meeting on the 14th to discuss any further budgetary requests that are needed to go to the legislature to support further work that we don't have built into the budget for this year. And then moving on to just a broad legislative update, and then I'll just open it up for folks to jump in. So as I said, Jane and Julie and others, members of the steering committee, have been doing sort of a CAP roadshow, providing updates and overviews of the climate action plan, its development, and the outcomes, general broad outcomes from those. Again, supported by members of the steering committee and co-chairs of particular subcommittees when needed. Presentations have been given in House Natural Resources, House Ag and Forestry, Senate Ag, Senate Natural Resources, House Energy and Technology, House Transportation, and Senate Transportation. There are a lot of bills of interest right now, but a few to highlight are the Environmental Justice Bill, UVA changes to support old forests, Act 250, the Clean Heat Standard, fuel switching and weatherization, And then I'll just note that the governor's budget included a number of ARPA funding for CAP priorities, as well as the creation of a climate office. I'll just stop there and see if anybody, David or others, want to jump in and provide a bit more detail on bills of interest for this subcommittee. So you all are much more up to date on those than I am.
Well, I'll give a particular, I mean, each of those are probably worthy of a few minutes of discussion, but the one I'll just add to the list is a bill called H606, which is a 30 by 30 category kind of bill. It's built on the idea of conserving 30% of the state's land by 2030 and 50% by 2050. And I'm part of a coalition of, Audubon's part of a coalition of environmental groups that have been weighing in on it. Our concern was with the bill was it seemed primarily focused on permanently conserved lands and also primarily focused on lands that weren't being, that were kind of set aside for wilderness and didn't seem to have goals that related to working lands, including agriculture. So we're suggesting a set of recommendations to that bill to amend it to add to the Agency of Natural Resources task to set goals for these other areas. And it aligns with one of the recommendations that this subcommittee made in the climate plan, which was to spend some time doing work on kind of the natural and working lands categories. So anyway, I throw that because I thought it would be of interest to this group.
Thanks, David. Does anyone else have updates? Ryan or Abby or Billy or anyone else who's been following certain bills that may be of interest for the subcommittee?
Well, Iris or Judy might be more adept at talking about S-148, but I know that they're taking testimony on Senator Rahm's environmental justice bill, which I think is S-148. Is that, does anybody know? Okay, Judy's nodding. And certainly that was, a recommendation of ours really early on in the process. And so I'm not sure where they're at in terms of who they need or who they're looking to bring in, but, certainly I feel like if anybody hears that they want more people to bring in, I'm guessing we certainly have folks from this group that could come in and testify appropriately to that. And we should be keeping up with it, I think. Also there, oh God, somebody's gonna help me with the number. Is it H273 or 276? The land access bill, I cannot remember which number it is another one that I think we should be keeping a little bit of track of to do with particularly BIPOC land access in the state and the ways that we're thinking about equity in land access moving forward. And sort of from a
73, Abby.
Okay, a reparative lens on land access. So we should, that's another one. And I'm sure there are some other more kind of ag specific ones if I thought about it, but I'm not prepared to have that off the top of my head. So maybe Ryan has some, or maybe John has some, and I'll stop there.
Sure. Updates I have to share include the governor's proposed budget includes $5 million for agronomic practice implementation to achieve climate goals. We'll see how that funding recommendation sugars off through the budget discussion process. Also of note is this supports one of the recommendations from this subcommittee is $1 million. So the $5 million is from ARPA, the $1 million is general fund recommendation for payment for ecosystem services, working group development and implementation. That group is looking at measurements and outcomes that would have climate benefits as well, both on the mitigation and of course resilience side. Conversations have been moving forward in House and Senate agriculture related to both they've of course been taking testimony from many different people that have been speaking to both agricultural and forest land carbon sequestration, And then working to, the testimony I provided has focused on the work farmers have been doing through the state's clean water efforts and how those could be quantified for mitigation benefit and how they also play into future resilience. Those conversations have not been attached in any particular bill at this point in time. One bill that has moved forward, which has actually been passed out of the House, H466. This relates to surface water withdrawals and future permitting program. And so as it relates to irrigation and surface water withdrawals for agriculture, that is an important bill to be aware of, as it would set up a both registration and reporting program for water withdrawals and future permitting for those activities. And so that's a bill that isn't necessarily related to any specific recommendations that this committee worked on, but looking towards the future climate impacts and episodic droughts that may become more likely in the summer months. That certainly is a bill of interest, I think, for certain farmers across the state, most principally our vegetable and berry growers that are the primary surface water users at this time for irrigation purposes. That's H466, and I think that covers most of what I have to update at this time. Thanks.
Ryan.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just want H466 is the one, right, that like 93% of the farmers that would be impacted are farming 1 to 3 acres of land. Is that, am I remembering that?
Yeah,
statistic?
1 to 9 acres of land.
1 to 9 acres.
The primary water users in the state, based on USDA census and survey data on surface water withdrawals and groundwater withdrawals. Of course, groundwater is a whole separate regulatory framework. This is a surface water withdrawal framework. But yes, your point is, our understanding is generally very small users of water, distributed pretty equally across the state on a county by county basis.
And just because I'm a troublemaker, I'm going to also say that the interesting part about this is that the surface water withdrawals in entirety for agriculture across the state are less than one of the lower rungs of the entire draw of surface water from Okemo. Is that the right one? So from an equity perspective, I think this one is a really interesting one to keep an eye on because, you know, as we all know, small farmers tend to be, they can't meet economies of scale. They're disproportionately burdened by regulatory frameworks in this type of setting. And I think, you know, we've talked a lot about the impacts of tourism and sort of the unequal burdens that, you know, the ways in which tourism impacts us, but that we don't talk about sort of holistically. And I think this is kind of the perfect example of where in a policy, we could have the opportunity to share some testimony to bring to light some of how those inequities are presenting themselves on the ground to the potential detriment of our food security versus tourism. Just some thoughts there. Judy? And then Billy.
Ryan, I have a question. Does this bill address farmers who are pulling water from the rivers that are polluted to use on quote unquote organic food?
No, this bill is looking at surface water quantity and ensuring that flows are maintained that meet water quality standards. Water quality standards for the use for growing food would fall under, I would think, the Food Safety Modernization Act, and not, this bill isn't looking at quality of water used for growing human foods, more taking the water from a stream or pond and making sure there's sufficient water in there to maintain aquatic life and other uses.
Okay, thanks.
Billy?
And then I was just going to add, I don't recall the number, but there has been a House bill passed out of House Natural Resources, I believe, that makes some changes to the forestry current use program to increase the allowance for old forest management if certain conditions apply. So that was something we talked a lot about as a subcommittee, and I don't think the bill goes as far as some of our group had recommended, but it does make some significant changes in that direction.
Jake? Thanks, Billy. Yeah, I can't remember what that one is called either, but if anybody wants us to get that information to them, we can. I could find it after this. Jake?
Yeah, just one more thing to pay attention to, but there is a workforce development bill, H703, and there are some measures in there that I think have impacts on the sort of food and forest economies. And there's also stipulations for paid internships and apprenticeships, support through VSAC, new American focused programs to the State Refugee Office. So, and some pretty significant sums of money that are being designated for these things. So just something I think to watch, and there could be some overlapping impacts for our sectors that we're looking at. And also, there is also a measure for VTC for skilled meat cutting training and apprenticeship for a facility specifically. So touches upon some of those education workforce issues that we've discussed here, and might be overlap with some of our recommendations related to that.
David?
And one other bill, Marion already pointed out that there's some Act 250 legislation moving, and there's a bill in the Senate Natural Resources Committee that includes some important forest fragmentation provisions that would protect against, give greater protections to large forest blocks that the environmental community is advocating for anyway, but I also think aligns with some of the recommendations of this group.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts on legislative updates at the moment? Crickets.
Oh, yeah, sorry, today there's proposal being discussed in Senate and House Ag that would look at making some minor changes in some of the programs that are in the water quality chapter for the Agency of Agriculture in Title VI about broadening the applicability or purpose. So the purpose includes to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from agricultural operations, and then in the implementation section, aligning what the grants can be used for to include that purpose. So it would be, there's a large focus on manure management injection, which obviously is important for the water quality side, but the request would be to broaden the allowance for those grant programs to take a look at climate goals as well through the Capital Equipment Assistance Program and the Farm Agronomic Practices Program, beginning to build a bridge for those co-benefits and their assessment in putting forth grant programs for agronomic practice implementation in the state. So that's being discussed today, or right now, in Senate Ag.
Hey, Abby, this is Billy. I'm about to turn on my road, so I'm gonna fall off the call briefly. If my driveway's plowed, I'll join you shortly. If I have to walk up my driveway, I'll join you a little bit later, but I'll be back soon.
Okay, good luck. Okay, so great. Hey, we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Job well done, I think, right? That was the last. Marion, do you have any other wrap up information you want to throw our way? Okay, cool.
Oh, not unless folks have questions, but I think we covered a lot of it.
Questions? Anybody?
Marion, can you speak to how often the steering committee and council's meeting, just for everyone's benefit?
Sure. So the steering committee schedule will likely be tied to the council schedule, obviously, because the steering committee has to approve the agendas for council meetings. The council will likely be meeting monthly for the foreseeable future. There was some discussion at council meeting about meeting once a quarter, but they will likely be continuing to be monthly, at least through the end of the legislative session, because of all of the quick work that's happening in the legislature and the stuff that the council needs to follow. That being said, I don't think the council is actually going to meet in February. I think they're going to have a meeting in early March, although that hasn't been scheduled yet. So we'll keep an eye out for that, but I think the rough schedule will be monthly, and then the steering committee will meet, a week or two prior to the council meeting to match that schedule.
Thank you for that. Any questions about council, steering committee, etc.? I just realized Judy put a note in the chat that her name is spelled wrong in the minutes, which I did catch as well. So if we can, if with that correction, do those minutes look good to everybody?
Judy, you did say something else in your comment about missing something. I wasn't sure what it was though.
Yeah,
Yes,
there were several minutes we didn't vote on, and I'm not sure if the 17th was the last one. I know in there it says that there weren't any taken for the one before that, but I think there was a third one before that we hadn't voted on.
I remember the one that we didn't have notes from. I don't remember if we voted on the one prior. I think maybe Marion and I can follow up on figuring that out after this one, but for today, as far as I know, the 17th are the last minutes that we had. That was the last meeting that we had. So if we want to approve those today, and then Marion and I can figure out the minutes prior that we did or didn't vote on and bring those back next time. Any issues on the minutes from the 17th? Okie dokie. So let's see. Now we're going to move into talking about work groups. So as you all are aware, there's a need to come up with biomass recommendations, the RFP for agricultural emissions inventory, and an RFP for the Municipal Vulnerability Index. And I believe that one is one where if we have somebody that wishes to participate from this subcommittee, and or if the subcommittee thinks that we should have somebody participating in that work group, we can also choose to let that be handled by Rural Resilience and Adaptation and their subcommittee members, and not participate, but that's an option that we have to decide. I know that Charlie couldn't be here today, but he did indicate that he was willing to move forward as a member of the Biomass Small Working Group. And I think maybe Judy had indicated that she wished to be, but we haven't talked about that recently. So I just want to check in on that. And then if there's anybody else, speak now or forever hold your peace, I suppose.
If we want to go through them one by one, Abby, I guess the reminder for biomass, I think folks are well aware, but there were a number of biomass recommendations that were tabled from the climate action plan before approval. And I have the wording in front of me. There were 6 actions associated with that for thermal heat, specifically around biomass co-benefits and impacts. The council acknowledged that there was not enough time for particularly ag and eco and cross sector to come together to discuss those. So those were tabled. And the hope is to come back with revised language for those recommendations in the spring was the timeline that was given. So it's not, there wasn't a specific date, but spring generally, whether you think that's in, June or April. And then bringing those to the council to think through those recommendations in a bit more detail. So what we're hoping to do is set up a small group of folks from Ag and Eco and from cross sector. This has already been discussed at cross sector, and I think there's at least Liz Miller with Green Mountain Power is interested in serving. They also recommended someone who's not on the subcommittee, who I think has biomass expertise, who works for the EIC potentially to join in. And that may be it, although I'd have to go back and check my notes. So we'd like to hear what folks from this subcommittee are interested in working on that. That group will meet separate from subcommittee meetings. CBI will be providing facilitation support for that group to work to come together with a set of recommendations to propose back to the council in the spring. And I do see in the chat that Ken Jones from ACCD is also willing to work on that group. And I'll keep a list of names and we'll follow up with scheduling. But I know Charlie did say he was interested. Judy, did you confirm you were interested?
Yeah, she confirmed in the chat.
Great.
Mary, I just, can you, I was trying to take notes, but I missed some of the categories. So we've got someone from the power sector, someone from efficiency, the energy efficiency folks at VEIC, Ken, Commerce and Community Development, Charlie, Forest sector, Judy, and Indigenous community. Like who, is there anyone in the environmental community on that?
I know, oh, go ahead.
No, you would know better than I was going to say. I don't believe that there is.
No, the only other name I think that was thrown out there was Billy threw his name out, but we'll let him speak to that as he's here now.
I do just want to clarify. So, pardon if this comes across, I don't mean for this to come across in a weird, Ken, I don't personally know Ken. I guess are we just, is this kind of like a free for all, anybody can put their name in to be a part of this working group? Or is this supposed to be like a structured, I'm feeling a little, how are we determining the parameters through which this is being decided? How are we deciding what representation needs to be at the table? How is that being done in an equitable fashion, et cetera, et cetera? Kind of curious about that, especially with an issue like this, which is so clearly really charged for a lot of people. So I want to check in on that.
I think that primarily it should be the subcommittee making recommendations to join this group. I think, you know, if you all or cross-sector thinks that it would be helpful to have Ken who's an economic analyst with ACCD be on that group, then that's a recommendation that you all could make. And appreciate, Ken, you throwing your name out there, but the recommendation should come from the subcommittees to join that work group.
Is this the biomass group?
Yes.
Yeah, should just be members of our subcommittee, as far as I'm concerned. I think that's what the plan has always been. There would be a subset of members from the various subcommittees who've got interest in the issue. If our group feels otherwise, I'm totally open to it, but I think my hope is that we've got pretty good representation within our group to do that. But that's how I've always understood the charge personally.
Yeah, that's why I feel like it sounds like cross-sector is bringing in somebody that's not in their subcommittee. Is that correct? I want to make sure that we're all approaching this in the same way, and I'm not feeling like maybe that's where we're at. So my understanding was that Judy and Charlie were, set to move forward with this, but I don't want that to put them in a position where that's not a balanced conversation.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if so when cross-sector had this discussion, we said the same thing, that it's the subcommittee should make the recommendations of who should join that work group. There was strong support for this particular individual because of his expertise in biomass. I have no idea if they've reached out to this person to actually join. And I can check with Jane on that specifically, as she said, conversations with Rich and Peter since then. But that was our guidance, was that the recommendation should come from the subcommittee of who should join the work group. That being said, I don't think it was limited to just subcommittee members, but that should be a conversation that we have if there's concern about that.
Okay. So Ken wrote in the chat, and yes, thank you, Ken. I'm not, this is I hope it's not coming across wrong. I'm just trying to make sure that we're having a good process around this. So he says that it's Adam Sherman that was recommended from VEIC, and he's a wood heat guy more than efficiency.
My sense is that whoever's doing this work can certainly invite in experts to kind of share their perspective, but that the kind of decision-making body should be members of the Vermont Climate Council subcommittees, right? Like that's always how I've understood this from the councils, but
Yeah,
if
that
I'm
would,
wrong, that's fine.
nope, that would be my take as well. So I guess the question at the moment is there anybody else that is in the subcommittee's membership currently that has interested in being involved in the biomass working group?
Yeah, I'm not volunteering, but I'm volunteering to talk to Lauren Oates and suggest that one or the other of us, it does feel to me like someone from the environmental community ought to be part of this discussion. So I'm going to talk to Lauren and I'll circle back. Marion, are you the right person for us to let know?
Yeah, myself and Jane, you can just CC both of us.
David, how are you defining the environmental community? Because that's how I would define myself.
Yeah. No, frankly, I guess everyone on the subcommittee is part of the environmental community. I should have been more specific. From an environmental nonprofit organization, which are the two representatives on the subcommittee that fall in that category, I think, are Lauren Oates and me.
And I fall into that category too. Gadakana is part of that.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so Judy and Charlie, we're moving forward with Judy and Charlie. David and Lauren are going to talk amongst themselves and reach out to Jane and Marion. Anything else on this at the moment?
Who is Liz Miller?
She works with Green Mountain Power.
She's the representative for electrical utilities on the council.
And she's not on this committee though, right?
She's on cross
on the-
sector.
She's on cross sector mitigation and she's a member of the Climate Council.
And did Billy just say it would be this committee and we would have people come in? I'm just looking at Marion, your comment in the
Yep.
chat box.
No, I think the recommendation in the climate action plan is it would be a joint group with Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee and Cross Sector Mitigation Subcommittee.
Okay.
So we're hoping to pull subcommittee members from both of those subcommittees, not just Ag and Eco.
Okay.
So what we're trying to, solve for is the fact that there wasn't time to bring together. Cross sector was sort of working on their track and had biomass recommendations and felt like they weren't aware of what we were talking about, and we were working on biomass recommendations and weren't aware of what they were talking about. And so this is the opportunity to bring those conversations together and try to come out on the other side with some recommendations to move forward with that everybody is in consensus around. Okay.
And just as far as my participation, if with David or Lauren and Judy and Charlie, that's enough. I certainly don't need to be there. I was just offering to participate if that was needed, so we can kind of wait to see how things unfold. So I'm happy and available to do it, but I certainly don't need to be there. So maybe we could just play it by ear.
Okay, so next up is the RFP for the agricultural emissions inventory. Will this meeting be open to the public? Historically, based on the task group meetings, I would assume that will be small enough that it won't necessarily, it'll be like a task group meeting. It wouldn't be a publicly posted meeting because there wouldn't be quorum, but I could be wrong about that.
No, you're right. That's how we've been thinking about these.
Okay. Obviously all of the information that is just like with the task groups, any information, the spreadsheets, etc., would be posted and publicly made available. And like Marion and Billy both said, you know, if the group decides that they want to bring in expertise to essentially testify or add, you know, content for them to consider, that certainly I would imagine is an option. So ag emissions. I am already so far down this rabbit hole, I'm happy to keep going. And I'm assuming Ryan is in the same boat, but if anybody else wants to come on down the rabbit hole with us, let me know. Marion?
I wanted to provide a quick update that Jane sent me about the Ag Emissions RFP. So I think folks, especially those who've been attending council meetings, will recall there's not specific funding identified in this year's budget for funding the development of the RFP for the Ag Emissions recommendations that the Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee developed. So in discussions with the Climate Alliance Natural and Working Lands group, ANR plans to apply for a grant that's very well aligned with improvements in ag emissions inventories and natural and working lands. That grant is for $100,000 or up to $100,000. It's due at the end of March, and the hope is that members of this subcommittee, along with Allie and Ryan and Agency of Agriculture, will help inform that grant application. And then if the grant was awarded, which we'll find out later this spring, that members of the subcommittee will help inform the development of a contract for that. So just wanted to update that Jane has found, and working with other folks from ANR, a potential funding source, which seems like it's very well aligned with what the intent is from the Ag and Ecosystems recommendations. So there is plans to work on that grant application in the hopes that we get it, working with Ag and Ecosystems to both develop that and then develop an RFP if that grant is awarded. So it doesn't change the conversation here, really. I'm still looking for folks interested in helping working on that.
Ryan? Thank you, Marion, for the update.
Yeah, thank you for the update. I would encourage this subcommittee in making recommendations for priorities. You know, the ag emissions inventory, as I recall the discussion at the full climate council, the RFP was intended to come to the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee to work to manage and implement the work of the RFP. I'm happy to collaborate in every way possible to develop an RFP that gets at the gaps that exist here. And I do think the ag emissions is certainly one component of it, but the broader context, I think the ag forestry and other land use sector synthesizing the gap that exists in our current framework, it's broader than just the ag emission side. So I do think it is inclusive of more than just agricultural emissions. And I am disappointed that there's many recommendations that are put forth for funding from the Climate Council. And this, I think, foundational RFP is not part of base funding that's being asked for from the legislature. I think that a grant is certainly a good step. I don't know if that amount of funding is sufficient for the scale of work that needs to happen for 85% of Vermont's land base. And I would encourage us to, you know, we've had many of these conversations, and I think a grant application is something that I'm, of course, willing to contribute to, but I don't think grant funding should be the only way to get at this. I think essential work that needs to happen before 2025 for the AFOLU sector. We may have a little bit more time now that the initial climate action plan is out, but I just want to raise that this group, and my understanding from the Climate Council, it's direct to be created in statute and to advise the Climate Council. And I think that this RFP should be funded regardless of grant funds being made available. Grants often have limitations in how money can be spent, and we need to dig in. You know, I have not looked at the details of that offering and what it can be utilized for, but I just want to express, first, of course, willing to collaborate, but second, this work needs to be funded regardless and shouldn't take a grant to get this work funded. Thanks.
Alyssa? And then
Hi,
John?
folks. Yeah, I wanted to offer to support this work whenever that happens, and whoever is leading it. I had imagined that it would be our subcommittee leading this work, and so that's surprising to me. I wonder if, Marion, you can tell us a little bit about how and why this got left out of funding for the Climate Council. I kind of expected that this would be given some priority, given the challenges we had about it over last fall.
I can speak to it briefly. I won't have as much detail as Jane will, so apologies for that. I think the funding that that A&R has currently for the existing budget that will be used for those two components that I referenced earlier, the Municipal Vulnerability Index and the Measuring and Assessing Progress tool, are both explicitly called out in the Global Warming Solutions Act as required deliverables. So the focus for A&R's budget development around those two components is really focusing on what's required in the Global Warming Solutions Act for those two deliverables. I think everything else can certainly still be pursued for additional funding. And to Ryan's point, I think applying for this particular grant to fund the development of an RFP for natural and working lands emissions inventories doesn't preclude also the pursuing additional funding through the legislature. I think it's really just a point of the deadline at this point for the grant, that it seems well suited to fund this particular work. And we would have to get that deadline in, that grant application in soon. But if other funding is received through the legislature, then that grant could always be withdrawn if needed, if there was additional funding that would cover that, to Ryan's point. So that's what I understand it, and through discussions with Julie and others, is that the focus for the budget for this year was really on those particular pieces of the Global Warming Solutions Act that are required, that have yet to be fulfilled through the subcommittee work. And then everything else is sort of a focus of pursuing additional funds in the legislature, but hasn't been fully budgeted yet.
Yeah,
sorry, if you want more detail, we'll have to touch base with Jane. That's what I have.
Yeah, just to kind of simply state it, what was budgeted are the things that are currently required in the act that have to be done. Anything above that, there's been a standing invitation to the council to basically request appropriations from the legislature. I don't know if anyone has done that for this item.
I don't know that either. I'll have to check back on that. Additionally, Marion, if you don't mind, if you could send along the information about the grant to those of us who are working on the RFP, that would be awesome. John?
I'm very interested in this. I'm hoping that a inventory, if nothing else, would dispel some of the misconceptions about agriculture's role, and would also hopefully, highlight some things that maybe we're not sure about. As some of you know, I am in the last week of my present job, and I am not sure in my next job what freedom I'm going to have to participate in future in the Climate Council. I'm hoping I will have freedom, but it kind of depends on what Washington, D.C. thinks. I hope to continue, and I will be continuing to be interested in this particular aspect very much so. Thanks. Oh, and Jake, I like your partner.
Thank you, John. We're excited to see what you do, where you're going, and welcome your participation if it's possible, but understand that your hands might be tied in that regard. Judy?
There. Could you explain how these three categories were chosen? I guess I watched a movie that Joey did the other day, It was a recap of everything. And she presented a chart where the largest gas emission came from tourists and the smallest greenhouse gas emission came from agriculture. So can you explain why there isn't anything on here to address tourism? How did these get chosen as things this committee is going to work on?
I can try to answer that, Judy. So the biomass one is an issue that, I think this group had raised as raising a number of issues that were not resolved by the council yet. So their decision was to have members from our subcommittee and other relevant subcommittees continue to work on it with the goal of providing a recommendation in the late winter and spring. So that's where the biomass.
But that's true about tourism too, because I brought up several times tourism and you said the governor won't go for that.
I don't know that I ever said that, but I think these are outcrops from the Climate Council's decisions when they finalized the plan. The municipal vulnerability index, I believe, is required in statute, and the ag emissions inventory piece is another topic that initiated in our subcommittee through the good work of many of you that was unresolved by the council, and they asked for work to continue on it. So I would really ask, Abby and other members of the council, because, if they have anything to add, but this was what came back to us from the council.
Yeah, I'm with you, Judy. I'm with you on this one. I'm really concerned about our lack of discussion around the climate impacts that tourism has on our state, and sort of the problem as I see it has been both the way that the GWSA was written, the way that the inventories are done regarding greenhouse gas emissions, and then the way that the council was set up and the way that the representation was designated means that essentially the majority of, as I understand it, the majority of emissions that come from tourism are wrapped up primarily in the transportation sector, because we have the consumption model that we use for the emissions, and therefore it's the amount of fuel that is utilized within the borders of the state that is measured for the transportation emissions. And so, when folks are coming in to, recreate here, et cetera, and are buying fuel here, that's sort of how that is accounted for, because aviation fuel is within the transportation numbers, et cetera.
But that doesn't solve the problem. So is someone addressing it?
At this moment, no.
Well, that doesn't make sense. I mean, when you have an actual chart that shows ag and tourism on the opposite ends.
Well, one, love for you to share that chart. That's a chart I'm not aware of. Two, I'm certainly happy the next council meeting to try to see if this is something we can bring up in a more holistic or comprehensive way. And I can also try to get you more specific information about how the tourism industry fits into the certain greenhouse gas emissions buckets. I'm not entirely certain of that for myself at the moment, except for the fact that I believe the majority of them do fall within the transportation sector. But I agree that it's sort of the elephant in the room in terms of it has a big impact, and we're not really talking about it as such. But are we good on ag emissions? I have Alyssa and myself and Ryan that are going to continue down that rabbit hole, and John per his federal designation, if he can or can't. And then I guess the next. Go ahead.
I know on the sorry, just on the carbon budget, I know we worked with Dr. Kasiba a lot on that, and where this is titled Ag Emissions Inventory, it is, in my opinion, broader than just ag emissions. And so making sure we have representation from forest sector as well, I think will be important for both, for the work of digging into the gaps that exist currently. So sorry, not trying to volunteer yet, Ali, but just calling out, and I know A&R is definitely on board with working on all this, but just want to call out that it's just a bit broader than ag emissions.
Great point. And yes, and Ali, I think, is here-ish. We'll let her jump in if she decides to, but I would agree that somebody with forest expertise would be really important if we're trying to think towards the IPCC's take on this, then it needs to encompass land use and forestry and agriculture.
I will say, and I didn't maybe say it clearly in my notes, Jane does plan to reach out to both Ali and Ryan to talk about how we can broaden this beyond just agricultural emissions. So ensuring that that's captured in whatever a grant application would look like. So Ali, you'll be getting an email regardless of whether you want to or not.
She's behind that screen, like shooting darts at all of us. Next question is, does anybody have any interest in working on the Municipal Vulnerability Index? This is something that, as Billy alluded to, is called out specifically in the Act under the designation of the statutory responsibilities for rural resilience and adaptation, and was just something that they, I believe, didn't have the resources right and the time to put everything together. And so this is sort of trying to figure out how we determine the vulnerability of different municipalities throughout the state in terms of climate and how we're going to think about community resilience in that regard. So if there's anybody that's interested in joining that group, that would be awesome. Otherwise, it's, obviously fine too for us to sort of stay out of that and leave that to rural resilience if we feel like that's better.
This may be something we also want to check with Lauren, given that she's the kind of, I think this is kind of her seat on the council, right? Is something to do with resilience. So she may be interested in participating. I think rural resilience would probably be fine to go alone on this, but if no one else is interested, we could maybe chat with Lauren to see if she wants to participate.
I think that's a good idea. I can reach out to her about that later, or Marion can, or okay, cool. Do we want to move into public comment a little early? Is there anything else regarding these topics that anybody wants to talk about further? Has any more questions? Okay, well, in the interest of saving you all maybe some time at the end of this, then I'm going to suggest that we jump into our first public comment, and then we can go on to talk about sort of the moving forward of this committee and who has capacity and who doesn't, and how we want to structure this moving forward. So if there are members of the public that are interested in sharing some thoughts with us, please raise your hand or turn your video on and let us know. Hi, Jennifer.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much. It's good to see everybody again. I wanted to say that I really appreciated the legislative updates, and especially putting particular bills in the chat. There were 3 of them, I think. And it made me wonder if there's a way that the subcommittee could compile all of the links to all of the bills that are being considered that are relevant to this subcommittee, And I noted a couple people, I think Ryan mentioned an example where it wasn't something that was brought forward particularly by the subcommittee, but that was certainly relevant. And I just think it would be great to have those all in one place. And I looked quickly on the website, and the resources section didn't seem quite right. Documents within the subcommittee, maybe not quite right. And the minutes would be another place those could be put in. But I just think it would be a great resource to have all of those available publicly. The other thing that I thought about was the Biomass Task Force, or whatever the particular name of it might be. And just wondering, you made mention that any sort of outcome, any sort of spreadsheet would be available, and just to sort of keep up to date with that, because I think that's of great interest to a lot of people. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. I will try to talk to Marion about how we might think about I like what you're saying, and I know what you mean. I too find the legislative keeping track of all of that to be really tough. So maybe there's a place where we could create sort of a spot for bills of relevance to this committee particularly, or something like that. But Marion and I and Billy can, think about that, and we'll definitely try to figure out a way to do that. Cheryl Joy.
Hi. I wonder also about the task force, and just a question on whether it is available to just watch, or if it's disallowed that the public, I understand it's not going to be warned or posted or something, but is the public allowed to watch, and even without public comment time?
I don't think there's frankly even a game plan yet or how these things are going to work. So I don't think there'd be any desire to exclude people. I just don't know that there's even a framework for these meetings to occur yet. So I don't know if we have the answer for you.
Okay, well, if it's available to just view, I'd love to do that, even if it were after the fact. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I apologize, Cheryl, that we don't have a better answer in that regard. I think the task groups that we did for this group were so long ago now, they were last spring that we did that. And so I'm not sure how that's morphed, if at all, at this point. So we'll keep you updated, certainly. We know you're interested and appreciate your interest. And we'll try to keep you updated as to how the public members who have been really involved in this subcommittee's work can keep track of that as it moves forward.
Thanks. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It would be good to just pay attention. And the list, Jennifer, that was great. Thanks for it'd be great to have the list of bills separated by subcommittee. That's even better than just the whole list of bills in legislature. All right, well, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to offer public comment at this time? Okay. Hey guys, we're like cruising along here. This is great. Okay, so future agriculture and ecosystem subcommittee meetings, purpose, frequency. I also feel like, just in the interests of community well-being, I should ask if everybody is still on board to continue, or whether you're ready to, get rid of this in your life at this point. Maybe we gave you enough of a pause that you're willing to keep playing. Okay, thumbs up from Melissa, thumbs up from John, thumbs up from Judy, thumbs up from Jake. David's consciously keeping his head down so he doesn't have to answer this. Billy's not allowed to say no, but he wishes he could.
If this subcommittee can solve daycare issues, then I'm definitely in. That's the bigger issue more than anything else.
Jake, I thought so hard about how I could put day childcare into the cap, but I couldn't get there.
Yeah. I'm on that subcommittee. Or that task force. Let's get to work.
If I could have, I would have. Maybe that can be our next update. We all need childcare. We can't continue. And also, I don't want to ignore in this the fact that we have had incredible assistance from state staff along the way too. And I don't know whether you all even have the option or not, but appreciate you and really sorry, not sorry. Iris, I know that you talked that the commitment in terms of school and stuff has been really hard. So we would love to have you, but
I haven't reached this yet with Marion and Jane, but at some point I am planning on stepping down just because I'm transitioning out of high school. So I will definitely continue to be on the subcommittee until that point, but I'm hoping to sort of have a slow transition so that I can onboard whoever the next member ends up being and sort of not throw them into all of this.
Well, we and they, I'm sure, will deeply appreciate your willingness to thoughtfully bring them in. So again, massive appreciation for all you've done. I truly don't know how you've, I don't know how you've done it. So are we, Billy, do you want to jump in here about, I don't have a great sense of, I'm thinking maybe monthly meetings just as a check-in or to keep track of things, but again, I'm not, or Marion, I'm not sure kind of what the best.
Maybe at least we schedule one for next month. I think what I see the need going forward for us to meet as a full group is to kind of receive and process updates from the various folks working on the task groups. So, as Judy and Charlie and others dig into the biomass issue, as you all work on the Ag Emissions Inventory, there may be pieces that you'll want to bring back to the full group for either updates or to have people weigh in on. And that's probably another conversation we should have is, what the full subcommittee's expectations are around awareness and involvement in the work of the task groups as well. But I think probably meeting, once a month for the next month or so, maybe we bring it down to an hour or, unless we've got some real meaty agenda items, but just to kind of keep folks aware of what's happening. And then if things are quiet and playing out over a longer time frame, maybe we don't need to meet as often. But I'm certainly open to what the collective feels is the best approach.
Ryan?
That makes sense to me, Billy. I like quarterly would be fine. Maybe every other month during the session and while these work groups are underway, but then after that. But I don't think we need to meet monthly on an ongoing basis unless there's something, I suppose there could also be, it's a headache. I know, Marion, to schedule these things in an ad hoc way, but if there was like some emergent issue that arose, could always try to look for a time that on an ad hoc basis, just to sort of a meeting together.
Ryan, go ahead. The one thing I would say too is I did want to at least acknowledge that, we can change when the meeting is, how long it is, at what time it starts, things like that. We could do a poll in that regard if this time isn't working well for folks. I know that kind of the middle of the morning is a tricky time for me. I can make it work, but it's tricky. So, I think we're open to reassessing the time as well if that's felt like it's needed by folks. Sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
No, thanks. I appreciate all those comments. looking at the charge of the subcommittees, right, to advise the council and to carry out other duties. Looking at the composition, so I've Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, right, where many of the agencies of jurisdiction are named to the council, and looking at the composition of the Climate Council, there's one farm and forest representative. Abby, you carry a lot of water on the Climate Council, and looking at representation from clean energy sector, energy and data, small business, Vermont manufacturers, fuel sector, and electric distribution utilities. I think there is a significant need for the Agriculture and Ecosystem Subcommittee to review and advise the Climate Council. The policymakers are discussing stuff with the legislature right now, and we'll see where that comes about at the end of the session. But as we work towards implementation and future development of a climate action plan, not saying we have to meet monthly or as much as we have, and appreciate, David, your comments for ad hoc meetings, but the importance in the development of the climate action plan, yes, there is a cause of action available for failing to meet emission reduction targets, but there is also the same weighting given to building resilience within Vermont. And I think that the work that this subcommittee has done for natural and working lands has really helped to elevate the importance of those pathway strategies and actions for food systems and our other natural and working lands, that I very much value the review and discussions we have in this subcommittee, and would really encourage us to continue to meet and be as proactive as possible in elevating relevant recommendations to advise the council on how to implement policies. As there is obviously anxiety about cause of action being brought for failing to meet reduction targets, but there also is a significant need to look at all of the goals that we've discussed, I think, in very great detail in this subcommittee, and making sure that voice is maintained as this process continues is something I would encourage us to consider. And so certainly support us meeting as much as needed and being as proactive as possible in voicing concerns, ideas, and suggestions and recommendations as a committee, subcommittee. Thanks.
That's a great point. I wonder if there's a way, because a lot of this I think is particularly relevant given the fact that we're in session and so much of this is to the point of you bringing up the surface water bill, Ryan, right? Like, it's not necessarily entirely clear where our areas of jurisdiction are showing up in bills that are moving and things like that. I wonder if there's like, do we almost need like or are there people that are willing to kind of keep track of some of the legislative needs and felt like, I don't know, just email the subcommittee if there's, I'm just trying to think if there's like a strategic way to have us keeping track of some of those needs, potentially to elevate the importance of those issues from the framework of climate, and how we might go about doing that without kind of, I know everybody is not in need of more meetings, so I'm trying, I want to be conscious of that, but I take your point.
I was speaking specifically to the Climate Council, where organizations and members have specific interests in bills and policies that are being discussed in the legislature. I think that's everyone's prerogative to, engage in that process. As far as sharing information, I'm always happy to raise awareness to bills and the process that they're moving through in various subcommittees. And so if this subcommittee has an interest in understanding, or I can share updates about where bills are moving, if that would be useful. I think I'd be left to each individual organization and member to engage however they see fit, rather than as a subcommittee on the legislative front. I was referring more to the Climate Council deliberation process.
Okay. So we're gonna stick together mostly. We're gonna schedule a meeting in March. Does that sound doable? Maybe mid, late? can tell you all are so thoroughly captivated by this conversation.
Yeah, and I'm just mindful of David's comment also of, maybe going to every other month. Maybe it does make sense to schedule something for kind of mid to late March, after town meeting break, where, the crossover dates in the legislature when bills need to move from one body to the other to kind of remain viable for the session is kind of mid-March. I think it's the 11th for policy bills and the 18th for money bills. So, if we meet sometime kind of near the end of March, there'll probably be a good legislative update that can be shared in the sense of what bills are actually going to be moving forward. And then we can discuss if we want to meet less frequently, more frequently after that, if folks are agreeable to that, but not maybe plan much further out than that.
That makes great sense to me, if others are comfortable with that.
Yeah, I like that approach as well.
So my next question would be, do Fridays at 10 work, or do we want to switch days, switch times? What's the will of the group?
Don't change something that's working.
Remains generally an open slot for me. Yeah.
Yeah, as I say, it's worked so far, so
Great.
keep it.
So let's see. Do we want to tentatively say the next time we'll meet will be the 25th of March? Does that work for folks to kind of put something on the calendar so that we know that we're touching base at a certain point, and then we can kind of go, at that meeting, we can determine how people are feeling about the frequency moving forward after that.
Abby, I have
Judy?
a question. Does anybody know when crossover is? Because it might be good to hear about what's happening in legislation before crossover in case we have a comment.
I believe it's March 11th for policy bills and March 18th for money bills.
So should we take that into consideration when we're trying to determine a date to meet again?
This is where I am at a loss. This is not, I don't know. I would welcome anybody else's who works more closely with the legislature, their thoughts about that.
Well, I think we flagged the bills that are kind of in play that intersect with the recommendations of the subcommittee. What would be the purpose, Judy, of us getting together before crossover? Are you thinking that this subcommittee would take some action?
Well, this subcommittee might have comments as to what's just been decided on so far.
Comments that we would share with the legislature?
Yes.
I think
sorry, I was butting in.
No, go ahead.
I think some of it, Judy, is going to just be on us to keep as individuals. Sorry, my partner wishes to speak. As us as individuals to sort of keep an eye on some of these bills and intercede sooner rather than later. It's I don't know that we can organize this committee to get together to debate or discuss or be informed about a bill in time to have relevant input. I think we've kind of, if our interest is there, and certainly mine is, I think there's some interesting things here. It's keep an eye on them individually and reach out to legislative council or to the chairs of particular committees and say our piece.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, I think just given the complicated nature of bringing us all together and sort of the disparate, to Ryan's point, I feel like it might be putting a lot on all of us to not feel like we have the the citizen right to go into the legislature as we see fit based on, Judy, your representation of Godakina or David's representation of Audubon, et cetera. So certainly I think what might be nice to keep in mind is just that, we are in, I like to think, coalition with one another. And so if it seems like you're going in for testimony about something and, if you feel like it's relevant to ask somebody else's perspective that you've worked with on the subcommittee, or you think they might have expertise that would be useful to that bill that maybe the chairs of that committee haven't thought about, I think that's kind of a great way to sort of, one of the things that I think this subcommittee has that's powerful is that it did start for one of the first times to bring together, components of people from corners that often don't talk to one another. And so that's one of the strengths I think we have here. And so however we can be in the legislature and demonstrate the opportunity that we have as people working in coalition between agriculture and ecosystems, I think is a really powerful thing to do. But, I think we can leave it to John's point as an individual basis, to pull in as we see fit. I'm not sure though that we did, are we looking to the 25th of March, or do we, and just we'll sort of check in if somebody has something specific regarding legislation that they want to bring up. Certainly we can always email about that.
Yeah, I think the 25th works. Sounds like a good plan. We'll convene and check in and see what's in front of us.
So March 25th at 10 a.m. we will all plan to see one another again. And then, just keep in mind that we're all out there doing, I think, really important work, and happy to, certainly for myself, I'm happy if I can help support somebody else in an advocacy effort. I'm happy to jump in and try to do that to the best of my ability. So,
And just before we go on, Marion, at some point, would you be willing to put a calendar invite out to this group for that meeting? Thank you.
I will do it right after this meeting. Yes.
Thank you. David.
Just before we move on to whatever the next topic is, I had an exchange on text message with Lauren and Jamie Fidel. And many of you may know Jamie. He's the forest lead for Vermont Natural Resources Council, and someone that spent a big chunk of his career working on a set of forest issues, including biomass. And I know we didn't want to have non-subcommittee members participate, so I'm not suggesting him as a participant, but I think, as Judy notes, she's representing an environmental perspective, and Charlie in his own way is representing that as well. So I don't know that Lauren or I need to participate, but I was just going to suggest to the group, and Billy, if you're going to, I don't know if you're chairing the group or how that's going to work. You're definitely not. But whoever's chairing that or pulling it together, I would just encourage you to consider Jamie Fidel as one of the experts that you might engage him to bring some of his perspective forward. But otherwise, I think Lauren and I are both feeling like we've got too many meetings already to sign up for this.
Judy?
I don't know how to say this. I agree, David. Diversity is good, and to have a bunch of people. I'm particularly concerned about this committee because Liz Miller represents BED, and BED owns McNeil. So there's a clear conflict of interest here. So I think diversity is important because I'm not sure that we can do anything about the conflict of interest. So thank you for your suggestions, David.
And, I'll just say, if the group decides they want to broaden the task group formally and include others that aren't on the subcommittee, I have no problem with that. I was just trying to clarify that my understanding from the council's intent was that it was just going to be members of the various subcommittees. But if once this work gets started, you all feel that it would benefit from folks external to the process, I think that's fine too. I don't have a personal view one way or the other.
Do you have a personal view about conflict of interest?
I know that Liz is the electric utility sector representative on the Climate Council. So I think she's here to represent that perspective, and they're clearly supportive. There's clearly wood-fired power plants that those utilities rely on. I think it's up to the council what they think is appropriate for who sits on this. It's not my decision. So
Yeah, I think the really complicated thing about it is that that sector appointment was appointed by the legislature. I believe she was a House, I believe that seat is a House appointment. And I know that certainly I have heard, people think that I have a conflict of interest in representing the farm sector. So I think it's one of those really tricky, sticky wickets that I'm not sure. I take your point, Judy. I'm just not sure how.
Yeah, because there's a difference between being on a committee to advertise or to give input for Burlington Electric's concerns, and it's a totally different thing to be on a task force and represent the company who owns the discussion of the task force.
Yeah, I almost feel like that would have to be something that I don't know. Marion, do you have any? Would that be something that we took to the steering committee? I'm not sure how to address that concern.
I'm not sure either, and I don't think I have a good response. I think, again, the council left it up to the interested subcommittees to appoint folks to this task group. So I don't think there's an intent to bring those to sort of formally be approved by the steering committee. I think you're welcome to raise it at steering committee. Liz is on the steering committee as well, so would be there for that conversation. But
so
I can touch base with Jane and raise your concerns, but I don't. I'm not sure there's a clear path forward here.
So was she appointed by the steering committee, or did she volunteer?
She volunteered, but was they're not official appointments to this task group. It's sort of, again, like a work group to talk about the recommendations that were tabled regarding biomass and thermal heat. And she volunteered as a member of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee because of her interests.
John?
Judy, I'm sorry, you may not like what I'm about to say, but I do not see a problem, to be quite honest. Yes, Liz Miller represents a group that have a interest in continuing the burning of biomass. But in my understanding of this committee or task force is to gather the weight of evidence that demonstrates one way or the other which we should go. So if the weight of evidence of all the other participants is such that it becomes self-evident that biomass is not in the best interests of the state of Vermont, if not America or the world in general, then that should become obvious on the task force. She is one voice, and I think one, you talk about diversity earlier, well, you know, industry is part of diversity, comfortable or not. You know, it's so I just think it would actually be a might be a task force that, if it doesn't represent all these differing, or as many of these differing viewpoints as possible, then the outcome of the task force might possibly be questioned. So that's my input. I wouldn't, to be honest, I wouldn't worry too much about Liz Miller being on there, or any representative of the task force. I mean, you know, it's a problem throughout society. I mean, you know, Abby mentioned that earlier that she might be a conflict of interest to agriculture. I was trying to rack my brains to something funny to say, but I couldn't figure it out, so I'll leave it.
Yeah, I will say that I think in order that's the thinking at the moment, is that it's sort of one of those things where we have to bring together all of the different perspectives in order for whatever comes out of that at the end to feel credible at the end of it, because it has appropriately represented the various viewpoints. You know I get really touchy when, which happens constantly, people are making rules about the industry in which I work, or the work that I have to do on a daily basis, and they haven't asked me to give my thoughts, or somebody like me to give my thoughts. And I think this is a little bit of the same thing, you know, that yes, it can be construed as a conflict of interest. It can also be that, you know, we're trying to have the broadest representation to make sure that the way that we're coming to the solutions is just and equitable for all parties involved. I think is another way to think
Which is
about it.
why I thanked David for suggestions of additional environmental people.
Yeah.
Because I know, after spending months and months of dealing with this issue with Charlie, I know his opinion. And it's direct opposite of mine. And so a diverse group would be good. But to get that, apparently we have to go out of this committee.
Sorry, they canceled school. Somebody take over first.
Okay. So I guess to kind of wrap up this topic, we can certainly, you know, through Marion and her role and through Abby's role as a council member, kind of share the feedback that we would like to see as diverse representation as possible on the biomass working group. And if that requires kind of going outside of the members of the relevant subcommittees, that may be appropriate, and just get the steering committee to provide us some feedback there. But regardless, we want to make sure that that group hears from a real range of voices as they're collecting information and making their ultimate recommendation.
Thank you.
Sure. And other than that, I think we've got most of our agenda taken care of. We've got some potential task group members lined up. We've got a sense of our schedule for this group, at least for the next month or 6 weeks. And I don't know that we have too much more on our agenda to cover today.
No, it looks like we could open it up to public comment. And then apparently I can give my computer over to my son, who desperately needs to install a guitar app or something.
Yeah, I do think we had a little space on the agenda. If there was any other topics subcommittee members wanted to kind of raise with the group or share, so, you know, let's pause here for a second to see if anyone else has any topics for discussion, and then if not, we can certainly move on to public comment.
Billy, I'm just going to take advantage of this moment just to see, I mentioned earlier that there's a possibility in my future role I may not be allowed to be. I think that's a slim possibility. I'm going to argue that I want to stay on. I cannot use this new job as an excuse not to be involved in anything in Vermont. I do, but if it happens, it's been a real pleasure working with all of you, as always. And of course, you know, it's Vermont, so I'm not going to be able to get away from you. And sadly for you, you're not going to be able to get away from me. You know, it's been a real pleasure meeting many of you who I've not had the opportunity to meet. Actually, many of you who I've still not had the opportunity to really meet. And hopefully one day we will all be able to have we should have a barbecue at some point and, you know, get together. I don't know how we'll cook the barbecue, how we'll do it without impacting the climate, but we'll figure something out.
John, do you think everybody should have to trek down here to the windswept tundra of southern Vermont that you experienced recently, or?
If we do that, Abby, we will do it in summer.
Come on, it's not that bad.
I bet it's rip roaring today.
Yeah, I know. Seriously, it's not that great either.
No, you're getting rain, and I'm looking. I just spent 2.5 hours plowing up my driveway, and I'm looking at what's happening out there. And oh God, I got to plow it out again so my wife can get back from the hospital. So, okay,
I would take snow. John, we're so grateful for everything you've offered. It's been wonderful to have you on board, and I hope that you'll be able to carve out an exemption to continue to participate. But if not, I'm sure we can hunt you down wherever you are. Anything else that anybody wants to bring up at this time, or should we move to public comment?
Share my appreciation for John's work on the subcommittee, and if you're unable to continue, you will be missed. So thank you for your contributions over the past year. Sorry to jump in there, Jake.
No, it's all right. I sort of don't want to add in my comment after what John said, because I think that was a good close. But yeah, and John, thanks. Yeah, it's really been wonderful to work with you, and I do hope you can stay with us. And I like the idea of a barbecue, so let's do that. I just quickly going to kind of our legislative update. It would be helpful to see if any of our ARPA recommendations are moving or tied to the legislation that's out there, whether it is ARPA or otherwise. I just wanted to be able to kind of track the progress of those specific recommendations and have a sense of if they are, you know, if there's any traction for any or all of them.
Yeah, we can certainly try to build the kind of budgetary pieces into any future legislative update.
That's a good idea, Jake. Okay, so public comment from anybody? Jennifer?
Again, just sort of an appreciation. I was thinking of Ryan's comment, and I'm sure that he didn't necessarily intend it as a pat on the back for the subcommittee, but that's certainly the way I think of it, and how important you all are in advocating for forested ecosystems, other types of ecosystems, agricultural ecosystems, and the role they can play. And I can see with the entire Climate Council how it would be easy for that there's so much else to be done and there's so many other considerations. I could see how that would easily fall off the radar. And I really think that this group of people has contributed so much and has so much to say and has a lot to say about climate justice. And I haven't attended the other subcommittees, so I don't know how much they've considered those thoughts. So I just wanted to, I'm glad you're meeting next month, and I hope that you're able to continue to contribute in that way. And that is the main thing. I forgot the other thing that I was going to say. I think it had to do with the biomass group. I guess what that was just sort of, yes, all these perspectives need to be in there, but finding a systematic way to make sure that all perspectives on biomass for electricity and how they get into the discussion of what should be advocated for. I would really encourage that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Anybody else from the public have anything to add? Okay. Look at that. Wrapping up 20 minutes ahead of schedule. Boom. Oh, Cheryl Joy. Go ahead.
Geez, I'm sorry it was so late. I just want to say it's nice to see you all again. It's been a while, and now we have to wait a whole couple till the end of March. But it's good to see you all and good to hear you talking about this stuff. I really, it's just, you know, important, and it's great to see you all. And don't come down here to this part of southern, or I'm just over the southern Vermont edge, and it's not great out there right now, so don't come down right now.
No, it's terrible. Terrible.
Yeah, my daughter didn't go to her babysitting job today. There's no driving around right this minute.
Nope. Well, yes, but I slid up to the farm and slid back down. Anyway, okay, so all right, and certainly I know that everybody, you know, a number of us have been dragged into the legislature fairly often already. So if you're missing any of our faces, you can look for them over there. So as always, so much gratitude to all of you for showing up today, for your hard work in all of the various arenas that you're working in, and especially within the work of the legislative session. To Jennifer's point, I think any of us that can keep, in whatever capacity we're showing up, to elevate the importance of ecosystem function for resilience in the various ways that we're all able to talk about that, I think is really important in this moment. And I really appreciate any of you that are having the opportunity to do that and your commitment to doing so. Billy, do you have anything else you want to add before we wrap?
No, that was very nicely put. Thank you, Abby, and thanks everyone for your work today.
All right, stay safe. Don't drive if you're in Southern Vermont.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
go sledding if you're everywhere else, I guess, or skiing or something fun.
Bye.
Bye, take care.